Let me start off by saying that I have never considered myself a superstitious person who believes in ghost stories. In fact, I'm the type of individual who desires evidence and facts over anything else, a see to believe kind of a girl. What I'm about to tell you might seem made up or exaggerated, but believe me if you can, it's not, even though I truly wish it was. I don't remember experiencing a paranormal event in my lifetime, that is until recently, which by the way, didn't take place all in one moment in one location. This creeps me out even more, and whatever I saw and heard will haunt me for a very long time. Now, I live in a very safe upper middle class neighborhood in Maryland. I never heard of robberies, rapes, or murders happening in the specific area where I live, and certainly have no personal encounters. This is why I'm fairly convinced that what I imagined I faced was in the category of ghostly phenomena. This story begins one early morning in the first week of May 2016. I remember feeling restless because of my out-of-whack sleeping schedule. I tend to like staying up late and sleep during the day. I have been getting a sufficient amount of sleep. It's just that my sleep pattern had been flipped recently. Living on my own in Lancaster while attending college is partially to blame. But I am back home for the summer and trying to fix that issue. So that is why on this night I am restless and agitated, tossing and turning in my bed while my parents and sister are sleeping peacefully through the night. It's still dark, so I look at the time on my phone and it's 5:30 a.m. and I am wide awake. I decide the best thing to do is to walk around for a little bit and read downstairs until I get drowsy. I tiptoe downstairs and try to be as stealthy as possible as not to disturb my family in their slumber. However, every step I take is creaking and squeaky because our house is moderately old but sturdy nonetheless. I make my way down to the first level and walk quietly through the main hallway to the back room. Half of this space is an open-style kitchen/dining area, and the other half is a living room. In the middle, dividing the two sections, are glass doors with trim leading to a small deck in the backyard. I turn on the lights nearest to the back doors and sit in one of the couches. I pick up a photo book my sister and I had made and began flipping through each page one by one. After a minute passes by, I hear something strange, a tapping noise. I look out the window and check to see if it's raining or drizzling outside, and it's not. I listen more intently to try and pinpoint where the noise was coming from, and I notice it's close, uncomfortably close, in one concentrated area in fact. It sounds like it's coming directly from the other side of the glass doors. There are door jambs on both sides, and the tapping noise appears to be coming from the vinyl siding next to the door. Steady tapping persists, and I peek out to see if it's an animal, but I see nothing. As I get closer to look, the noise stops abruptly. I can see everything in plain sight. There are no blind spots and the light is on, so I am confused as to what I heard, but decide to shrug it off as me being paranoid. I sit back down and open the photo book again. A few seconds later, the noise starts up again, but this time it's not on the vinyl, but instead it's on the glass of the door directly beside me. Tap, tap, tap. This time, my adrenaline kicks in and the sound sends shivers down my spine. My eyes steer my head in the direction of the noise, turning around and facing the door as the tapping only grows louder and closer to me. I see nothing there. It makes no sense, and I cannot fathom the moment in my mind. At this point, I am freaking out and bolt down the hall, up the stairs and into my room, quickly shutting the door behind me as I quiver in fear. I get back into bed and hesitantly peek out my window facing the backyard. The neighbor's backyard is directly across from us and bordered by a fence from our backyard. They have their beam lights on. It is so bright that some of the light is shining into our yard as well. My eyes are well adjusted to the darkness and can see if there is any suspicious activity going on. I am hoping there is no person trying to break into our home. I peer around the yard and the neighbor's yard for a few minutes, and suddenly my eyes spot movement around the fence. The light helps significantly where I notice this happening. I blink several times for clarity to try and comprehend what I'm seeing. There is definitely movement taking place. However, I cannot piece together who and what it is exactly. I don't see movement of leaves or the weight of footsteps on the ground. This thing appears to be levitating as if it weighs nothing at all. I think I am losing my mind. I look away and back and keep seeing this creature I cannot recognize as anything normal. It is small, black, yet somewhat transparent, and is moving in and out through the holes of the fence. As I keep staring, it even curves over the fence, back and forth, up, down, and then moves into the yard to suddenly evaporate into thin air. I am not sleep deprived, and I know that I'm not hallucinating because I basically slept all of yesterday. I am baffled and scared, but at the same time fascinated. My heart is pounding. I close the curtain and hide like a child under the covers. My eyes are wide open as the adrenaline is still pumping through my body. What just happened? I contemplate for hours until I drift to sleep. I wake up around 4 p.m. and am hesitant to tell my family about my paranormal experience. I tell my sister that day, and she is intrigued but skeptical at the same time. I knew she would be. A couple of days pass, and my parents, sister, and I are heading to New York City for vacation. Since I told my sister of what happened, I thought I should also inform mom and dad. I do in minimal detail, and I receive a polite response, but can tell they don't believe me, as if I was just being paranoid. Around 10 p.m., we arrive in New Jersey and stay at a hotel for the night before commuting another hour the next morning into New York City. My sister and I share a room in the Comfort Suite Hotel. And by this point, I try to convince myself that my bizarre ghost-like encounter was a one-time thing and that I should let it go and move on. I take Z-Quil and turn off the lights and get under the covers to try and fall asleep. After a couple of minutes, I notice myself dozing off, but not for long. I have anxiety and panic attacks every now and then, the kind where you feel like you're falling off a cliff or that the life is escaping from your body. Yeah, this happens now and again, but it's nothing unusual. Well, this night is different. I am comfortably falling asleep until suddenly my eyes open wide as I gasp for air in a state of panic. As I do, I see something. Towering over me next to my bed is a tall, dark, semi-transparent figure, very similar to what I thought I saw in my backyard the other night. I flinch backward in fear. I blink a couple of times, and all of a sudden, it disappears before my very eyes. Is this thing trying to torment me? Follow me? What is happening? Knowing that my sister is only feet away brings me comfort and a sense of security. I sigh heavily and eventually fall asleep. I attempt to suppress my thoughts of the events, which all took place within a week's time frame. Successfully during my stay in New York, I distract myself and have a good time. My family and I drive back home the following week, and the thoughts of the ghosts creep back. Each night before I go to bed, I peek out my window to satisfy my curiosity, but have seen nothing since I arrived home. From now on, I hope I hear no cringe-evoking noises or awoken to a towering ghost beside my bed trying to haunt me in my sleep. Things are back to normal, for now. I worked as a waitress back in the early 90s. This was the time when I resided in a medium-sized, low-income neighborhood somewhere in Georgia. And the incident which I'm about to explain happened not long after I had moved from Indiana. My hours at the restaurant sucked because I was assigned for dinner, so I'd always go home late. I haven't been to Georgia in over 2 decades, so I can't speak of the state today, but back in the 90s, their mass transportation system was terrible, and that's being generous. Still, the bus was the only way I could commute to work, so that's what I took every night to go home. I would get off from work at 9 p.m., and by the time I walked to the bus station, it was around 9:15. The restaurant was located in a safe area, but still, walking to the bus station and having to wait for the bus until 9:25 was never a fun experience. In a small town, there's hardly any pedestrians during the day, let alone at night. You don't even see that many cars on the road after 8 p.m. I had it pretty rough back then. I dropped out of college a couple of years back. My parents passed away many years ago already at that point in time, and the only thing I had in my name was the crummy old house my grandma had left for me as inheritance before she passed away. I had a nice gig in Indiana, which allowed me to attend college part-time and pay rent for a small studio. But then after some unfortunate turn of events, I was left with $900 in my checking account and with a very few options in my hand. My first thought was to sell the house my grandma had left me, but upon speaking to a local realtor, I learned for the first time in my life that some properties actually have no value. Let me put it this way, forget selling the house or renting it out. I'd probably have to pay someone to live in that junk or take it off my hands. So in the end, the choice was clear. With little money and no degree, I figured why not take advantage of free rent and try to save some money before moving to a bigger city to look for better opportunities. That's the reason why I ended up in Georgia, and I was working a crappy job. So back to the night of the incident, I was thinking of some random things to pass the time while I was waiting for the bus. At 9:27 p.m., I see a pair of headlights coming toward me, so I get off the bench and walk right next to the stop sign for the bus. The bus stops to let off and pick up passengers when I hear loud footsteps behind my back. I'm startled by the sound because there was no one near the bus stop. I turn around to see a man standing behind me, and I'm seriously creeped out by his sudden appearance. But he makes the situation even worse when he smiles at me and takes another step toward me. I quickly get on the bus and scan the chairs hoping to sit right behind the driver, but several front rows are already occupied by the other passengers. I would sit next to someone if I could, but they all have their bags placed next to them to avoid just that. I choose to sit in row 4 behind an elderly gentleman, and I'm feeling a little safer now. That is, until the man who got on the bus with me decides to take the seat right behind mine. I have a 30-minute ride home, and where I get off is only 3 stops before the bus makes its final stop, so by that time, the bus is usually empty. I was not looking forward to that, and really hoping the man would get off before I did. A couple of minutes into the ride, I begin to relax a bit more with the other passengers on board. In fact, I feel a bit embarrassed for getting so scared. For all you know, he was walking toward the bus stop all along, and I just didn't notice it. Even that creepy smile was probably him trying to be friendly. I sat on the aisle seat initially to prevent him from sitting next to me, but I normally ride by the window because I prefer the outside view. So I slide to the window seat, then put my hand on the window and rest my head against it. That's when I hear the man behind me also moving to the window seat, and even though I'm not looking, I can hear him put his head on the window. I sit straight, scared out of my mind. Why would he do that? Why did he just mimic what I just did? Maybe I was right all along. He is a creep. The thing that scares me the most is that he might have been hiding near the bus stop the whole time while I was waiting for the bus. He may have even followed me from the restaurant. Then suddenly the man starts to grind his teeth so loud that one of the passengers actually turned around to see what the hell the noise was. I can hear another sound too, but it's faint and slow. Shit, it's his hand rubbing against the backrest. It almost feels like he's trying to touch me, caress me. Even though we have a thick backrest separating us, I feel like I'm naked with only a piece of paper in between his hands and my bare back. I want to move to another seat, but I'm worried that might trigger him to do something. It's a feeling that most men probably don't understand. Knowing what you should do, but not being able to because you know you couldn't defend yourself in a physical altercation against a man. There are other passengers on board, but 4 of them are women, and the other 2 men look to be in their late 60s or maybe even older. It'd be one thing if there were young men on board, but the current people present doesn't give me much confidence. To make things worse, I see 3 people readying to get off at the next stop, and 2 of them happens to be the 2 elderly men. The bus comes to a stop as expected. We now have 3 less passengers on board. The bus starts to move again, and the man behind me moves to the aisle seat next to mine. Now the only thing separating us is the thin air in the aisle between my seats and his. I don't look at him. I do my diligence to ignore him, but I could feel his stare, and the grinding of his teeth makes my body squirm. If that wasn't creepy enough, now the man begins to giggle faintly. His voice is deep, so deep that it's intimidating. I know he's looking at me. I don't think he's looked in any other direction since he sat across the aisle. Some 15 minutes into the ride, everyone's gotten off the bus, and I'm now alone with the giggling creep just a few feet away from me. My survival instinct takes over, and it almost feels like my body is moving before I consciously direct it as I move to the seat right behind the driver. I take a seat and lean my body forward to speak to the driver and say, "Sir, the man seated in the back has been following me from my work. He was rubbing against the backrest of my chair, snickering, and he even switched seats when the other passengers got off. Can you kindly take me all the way to the last stop, let him off the bus, and then drop me off at my stop on your next route?" The driver answers in a condescending tone, "Ma'am, I drive the last bus on this route, so the last stop will be the final stop I make today. If you haven't noticed, this isn't a taxi, it's a bus." I feel desperate, ergo, I don't even mind the snarky comment, so I plead to him. "I wouldn't ask you of this if I didn't feel threatened. I just know that man's up to no good. I'm supposed to get off at the next stop, so when I do, please don't leave right away and leave the doors open. If the man gets off with me, then I'll jump back onto the bus through the rear door. Please, at least do that for me." I can tell the driver is not amused by my request, but he still answers quietly so the man behind us couldn't hear it. "I'll keep the door open if that gentleman gets off with you at the next stop, but don't expect me to bring you back here. Call your friend or whoever and don't expect anything more from me." I thank him and try to mentally ready myself for what's about to come. My hands are shaking so badly, my legs feel so weak, and I want to bomb it so badly. The bus comes to a stop. I get up and the creep in the back gets up as well. I walk forward a few steps, turn my head to look at the driver, and notice he's as spooked as I am. I get off the bus and I can feel the creep walking right behind me. As soon as I'm on the ground, I leg it to the rear door and get on the bus again with the reflex of a cat. The driver shuts the door close, but he doesn't drive off. The creep outside slams at the window on the door and the driver still does not move. I run to the front of the bus and scream, "Go! What are you waiting for?" That seems to have snapped him out of the freeze, and he floors it. Seconds tick by as the bus picks up speed, and it feels like an eternity with the creep following alongside the bus and continuing to slam on the door. Right before the creep couldn't keep up with the bus anymore, he throws something shiny and metallic at the bus, and it ends up cracking one of the windows. Relieved but also angry, I tell the driver, "I told you there was something wrong with him. He would have killed me if I didn't get back on the bus." The driver apologizes several times, and he tells me to ride with him to the last stop. He then radios someone and tells them to have the police come to the final destination. We get to the final stop, and he assures me that we'll be fine. He tells me that on foot, the creep couldn't possibly get here before the cops did in their cruisers. We wait for an agonizing 10 minutes in silence when I could see the police light flashing from a distance. I had never been happier to see the police. I thanked the driver before getting off the bus to talk to the police, and they apologized again for acting like a jerk. The driver was questioned by the cops before being allowed to leave. I was driven to the police station for further questioning, and I actually stayed there overnight. The police offered to drive me home, and they told me they would double the patrol in my neighborhood. But that night, I just couldn't go home. I pleaded to them to let me stay the night, and eventually a man stepped out of an office, then nodded at the officer who was questioning me. He seemed to be in charge, and he let me stay. When morning came, I informed the officer that I was moving back to Indiana, like today. There was just no way that I was taking that bus again, and my house wasn't safe either. The creep doesn't know exactly where I live, but he knows where I get off. If he really wants to hurt me, then it's only a matter of time before he finds a way. I guess the officer felt sympathetic of my situation because he offered to drive me home. Upon arriving at my house, he gave me 2 hours to pack my stuff while he waited outside. He was already off the clock, and he was only doing this out of the goodness of his heart. This is off topic, but I really wanted to mention that there are many good police officers out there. Officer Wilson didn't have to do this for me. Yeah, Wilson was his name. There are so many bad things said about the cops nowadays, and it makes me feel terrible that even the good ones are lumped up with a few bad apples. But anyways, going back to the story, I packed light and took the first bus back to Indiana. I moved in with my cousin and had never been to my old house ever again. I look back on that night and I know today what saved me on that day. It was partly the driver's willingness to wait for me, but it was mostly the fact that I read the situation correctly and I reacted accordingly. It's so easy to ignore a potentially dangerous situation, just hoping and convincing yourself that you are overreacting. But if you think about it, the worst that could happen by being vigilant is embarrassing yourself for overreacting. But on the flip side of the coin, being negligent of your instinct can potentially end your life. I no longer take chances with questionable characters, and I hope you won't either. Hey guys, Dennis here. I've got a quick announcement to make before I let you go, and of course I'd also like to thank Miss Wolf for sending in the first story, which I enjoyed reading, I would add. One thing that I can tell you for sure is that you seem a lot braver than I am. I've never been in that situation. I haven't walked up to the sight of a giant man or a thing towering before me. But if I were in that situation, I think it's a safe bet that I'd run like the wind and get the heck out of my room. I'm glad for you that it only happened twice, even though once is probably one time too many. But still, the fact that you don't see it anymore, it's great news. Thank you again, Miss Wolf. I'd also like to thank Katherine for sending in the second story. You are right in that me being a man, I couldn't fully appreciate what you felt on that bus. But by the same token, growing up in urban New York City, I've had my share of close calls in the past. I know how it feels to be in close quarters with a psycho. Back when I was attending college, I had a part-time job in Manhattan and I got off work very late. It's a long story, so I'm not gonna go into detail here, but I've had several uncomfortable encounters with strangers, and in two particular occasions, things could have turned very ugly had it not been for some timely luck and quick thinking. Although not 100%, I can definitely relate to your story. Thank you again for the story, Katherine. Lastly, I just want to mention that you will begin to see a good mix of shorter to longer videos from here on. That's not to say that I will stop doing the longer stories, because I personally enjoy them the most. However, not everyone's into the long stories, and I've gotten several comments about that. Therefore, in order to cater to the folks who enjoy the shorter stories, and I might also add, some folks actually prefer shorter length videos in general, so for those folks, I will be publishing a good mix of short, medium, and very long videos from here on. This channel is growing and growing rather fast, so we are beginning to have people with all types of preference. Even though I'm fully aware that I cannot please everyone, I think it's important that I try so that I can entertain as large percentage of my subscribers as possible. I think you guys know this already, but I always read your comments and I try my best to put your opinions into consideration when I produce my contents. So while they may not be perfectly implemented, I want you to know that your voices are heard loud and clear. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I gotta hit the treadmill for half an hour, so if you've got questions or just want to say hi, leave them in the comment section and I'll answer them after the run and a quick shower. I guess I'll be talking to you guys in about an hour. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay safe.